Most people who watch car shows remember the loud one, the tattooed one. The guy who walks onto a lot, shakes a seller's hand too hard, and talks horsepower like it's the only language worth speaking. Richard Rawlings built that reputation carefully across years of buying, flipping, and filming, and Gas Monkey Garage turned it into one of the most recognized brands in American automotive television. But behind every personality constructed on volume and momentum, there's almost always someone running the actual math, someone who knows what a car is worth before the hood even opens, someone who arrives at a deal with the numbers already calculated and cross-referenced in their head. For Rawlings, that person was Dennis Collins. And Collins doesn't look the part even slightly, which is precisely what makes his story worth sitting down with. He walks into a room, looking like he manages a boutique investment firm, suit sharp, hair clean, a coffee cup where most people in his world would be holding a beer, and yet the man has been buying, restoring, dealing, and collecting automobiles for well over 35 years. That gap between appearance and expertise is the core of who Dennis Collins actually is, and the story of what he built alongside Rawlings, what he accumulated on his own before anyone was filming any of it, and what he's been doing since the television cameras stopped rolling is the kind of history that tends to get buried unless someone pulls it out and lays it flat. That's exactly what this is. Collins's connection to automobiles didn't begin in a garage or a workshop. It started somewhere far more ordinary, on a bedroom floor with Hot Wheels and Matchbox cars, the same place it starts for thousands of kids who either grow out of it completely by their 20s or spend the rest of their adult lives chasing that original feeling. Collins never grew out of it, and the timeline of what he accomplished while still technically a child tells you everything about how seriously he took it. By the time he was 13 years old, he had already done something that most grown adults haven't managed. He sold his first vehicle, a 1948 F-14 truck, before he was even old enough to hold a legitimate driver's license. The first car he actually drove was a blue 1966 Ford Mustang, and that Mustang planted something in him that decades of success and accumulation never uprooted. The Mustang collection he maintains today is extensive, and every car in it is documented and preserved at a standard that would satisfy a professional appraiser, because Collins never treated his cars as trophies. He treated them as assets with histories worth protecting. What separated Collins from the average weekend enthusiast wasn't just passion, it was the understanding, developed early and applied without exception, that the hobby could be structured as a real business, and that building that business himself would always outperform working inside someone else's organization. That instinct pushed him toward a degree in economics and finance from the University of Texas, and he didn't let that credential collect dust on a wall. The education went directly into the operation. In 1984, Collins Brothers Jeep opened as a Jeep repair and customization shop, and the scale it eventually reached is not what most people imagine when they picture a specialty shop. The operation now processes over 70 restorations and 200 custom Jeep builds every single year, which means something in the range of nearly 300 vehicles moving through the shop annually on the customization side alone. Collins addressed the recurring question about what he actually does day to day with a line that gets quoted often: "Step into his Jeep world, and he'll show you." That invitation carries a different weight when you understand the volume of work happening inside it. The Jeep business was always the foundation, but Collins never stopped stacking on top of it. By the year 2000, he had launched Black Mountain, his own dedicated brand of Jeep parts and accessories, and that brand grew into something with real geographic reach. More than 15 conversion facilities now operate across the United States under that name, and a growing distributor network has pushed the brand into markets across Europe and the Middle East. Automotive enthusiasts who have never watched a single episode of Fast and Loud have almost certainly crossed paths with Black Mountain or its products without ever connecting the name to a television personality. The brand stands on its own commercial foundation, which reflects how Collins has always thought about the business side of what he does. The television was never the product. The product was always the cars and the knowledge behind them. Jeeps, though, as deeply as Collins has committed to them, are not actually where the most compelling chapters of his collecting story live. That space belongs to the Nash Healey, an American sports car that Collins pursued with a patience and consistency that most collectors never develop even for a single vehicle they care about. One of his favorite examples, a car he named Goldie, was something he tracked down over years and waited on until the people who owned it finally reached the point where they were ready to part with it. Collins has that kind of patience because he understands that the right car at the wrong time is still the wrong car, and forcing a deal before a seller is ready rarely ends well for either party. What makes the Nash Healey chapter of his story genuinely striking, though, is the sheer volume of them he accumulated. By his own account, Collins documented owning 500 Nash Healeys before he simply stopped counting, and the number he stopped counting at was not the number he stopped acquiring. Within serious collector circles, a long-standing debate exists over whether Collins owned and restored the very first Nash Healey ever produced. If that claim holds up, then the $500,000 the car fetched at auction was a number that significantly undersold the actual asset on the table, and the fact that the same car eventually sold for $1 million gives that reading some backing. Of all the vehicles that passed through Collins's hands across more than 3 decades in this market, that first Healey is the one he openly says he regrets letting go the most, and when the car is eventually worth more than $1 million, that regret has some very specific arithmetic behind it. The collection he maintains operates at a standard that most enthusiasts encounter only in written descriptions. Every car Collins owns sits inside a climate-controlled garage, protected against the temperature fluctuations and humidity levels that quietly degrade even the most carefully preserved vehicles over time. Mileage on each car stays deliberately minimal, sometimes effectively frozen at whatever number it carried when Collins acquired it, because he understands that use and value tend to move in opposite directions for rare vehicles once they cross a certain threshold of significance. And every car in the collection comes with full documentation prepared and accessible at a moment's notice, because provenance is the difference between a car that sells for something and a car that sells for a great deal more than something. The result is a collection that other serious collectors point to as a working model for how to build and maintain a portfolio of significant automobiles over the long term. None of this, however, explains how Dennis Collins ended up standing beside Richard Rawlings on a Discovery Channel show that ran 8 years and built a substantial following across the country. That part of the story starts in 1996 at a bike rally in Daytona Beach, Florida, and it starts with a nearly empty room. Only 11 people showed up to that rally, which meant that 2 men who would go on to collaborate on television, business, and a friendship that is still visibly active today ended up in a small gathering with nowhere else to be. Rawlings and Collins connected immediately, finding in each other something that the other had been missing, and the partnership that grew from that nearly empty room in Daytona eventually produced work that included a Cannonball Run, and years down the road, 2 television productions that gave the Gas Monkey Garage name its widest and most sustained audience. Fast and Loud ran on Discovery Channel from 2012 to 2020, giving the network 8 consecutive years built around the premise of locating old automobiles that were on their way to the scrapyard and turning them into vehicles worth selling at a meaningful profit. Garage Rehab followed from 2017 to 2019, working a related but distinct angle by sending Rawlings and a team to auto shops around the country that were failing either financially or operationally and attempting to rebuild both the physical space and the business structure underneath it. Collins appeared throughout Fast and Loud with enough frequency that viewers recognized him immediately, almost always wearing his Collins Brothers Jeep shirt, and his function on camera was rarely ambiguous. When Rawlings needed to know what a car was genuinely worth before committing to a number, Collins was the call. The negotiations that followed those evaluations made for effective television because both men actually understood the vehicles they were discussing, and neither one of them was performing knowledge they didn't have. Collins was present enough across Fast and Loud that fan mail found him consistently, and in 2014 he sat down for a YouTube segment answering questions that had arrived through Facebook and Twitter, a video that runs roughly 5.5 minutes and covers topics with a looseness that makes it genuinely worth watching. The hair came up, as it apparently always did, and Collins confirmed that there are no products in it, no gel, no spray, nothing applied at any point in the process, and on the long-running comparison to Justin Bieber that fans kept raising, Collins was direct. Bieber took the look from him, not the other way around. He talked about his wife Kim and their 2 grown kids, about some of his favorite cars, and about life in Wiley, Texas, a town sitting roughly half an hour north of Dallas that doesn't generate much attention on its own, but where Collins has quietly built both his business and his home. Between the Jeep business, the Black Mountain brand, the car collection, and decades of buying and selling at the level he operates, Dennis Collins has built a net worth that now sits above $30 million, a number that lands differently once you understand the specific, methodical path that produced it. When Fast and Loud stopped airing without any network announcement about what would come next, and when Rawlings signaled that returning to network television wasn't something he was actively pursuing, Collins didn't stop moving. Both men made the same transition, pulling their content off Discovery Channel and building new audiences on YouTube. And the friendship that formed in a nearly empty room at a Daytona bike rally in 1996 continued without any visible disruption. Collins runs Coffee Walk, a show that puts him in the field searching for rare vehicles from around the country, frequently in places that wouldn't make any serious collector's short list of promising locations. He and Rawlings still collaborate on Beer Walk, a YouTube show that puts the two of them side by side evaluating whatever interesting cars they've recently turned up, working through the value and the potential of each find the same way they always have. Collins brings the valuation expertise and the economic instinct. Rawlings brings the deal-making energy and the instinct for what an audience responds to, and together they still manage to find vehicles worth the effort. Beyond the YouTube channel, Collins maintains a website where his book, biography, brand, and upcoming events are organized in one place, and anyone holding a classic car they're considering selling can fill out an online form and submit it directly to Collins for review. That kind of accessibility is consistent with how Collins has approached this business for decades, keeping enough of an open door that the right opportunity can find its way in from an unexpected direction and still get a serious response. What the cameras across 8 years of television never quite captured, and what the pressed suits and the clean presentation still obscure for people encountering Collins for the first time, is that nothing about what he's built was accidental or circumstantial. A 13-year-old selling a truck before he could legally drive one, a finance degree applied immediately and deliberately to a concrete business plan, 500 Nash Healeys accumulated through decades of patient and purposeful collecting, a $30 million net worth assembled without a network or an inheritance handing him a head start. These are the outcomes of someone who understood what he was doing and why from an age when most people are still working out what they want. The economics background, the suit, the coffee, the careful documentation on every car in a climate-controlled garage somewhere in Texas, all of it points in the same direction. Collins has always been doing exactly what Rawlings does, finding what the market walked past, understanding its actual worth, and doing the work to prove the difference. He just does it in better shoes.